Well, if Bad Religion is the band in question, the answer is always yes. Bad Religion is an iconic punk rock band that's been going strong for 4 decades. But halfway through their run, it seemed like they were going to fade away into irrelevance. That was until a very necessary reunion happened and completely revived their careers. Now, in order to understand the significance of what transpired in the early 2000s, you'll need to have some understanding of the prior 20 years. I'm not going to go over every detail of Bad Religion's history. There's a few books that'll do that much better than I will. But think of this as a brief summation of the first 2 decades of the band. Our story starts in the late 70s, early 80s California punk scene, when a group of teenagers in a garage unknowingly created a new genre of punk rock. How do I put this eloquently? Bad Religion can kind of be described as an early part of the second wave of punk rock. Does that make sense?
We just sort of say these things as if they really made sense.
Okay, let me explain. Bad Religion didn't exactly go see the Ramones and then just directly start a band, but they're also not that far removed from that initial generation of inspired bands. They were like around to see the first wave, but also borrowed heavily from the second wave. Okay, I'm glad I cleared that up. Early lineups featured a few different members, but there's 3 essential members that are woven throughout the history of the band. Of course, you have bassist Jay Bentley, a man that, with one notable exception, has always been there. I like to think of Jay as the spirit of the band, kind of the link from the guys on stage to the audience. You've also got singer Greg Graffin. Dr. Graffin. He's the intellectual bedrock of the group, and the only member of the band to appear on every album. And last but certainly not least, you have guitarist and songwriter Brett Gurewitz. Okay, let's get back to their chronology. In the early 80s, Bad Religion began to pick up a solid following with the release of their self-titled EP and first full-length release, How Could Hell Be Any Worse? What makes those albums significant is not only the sound that they helped pioneer, but the fact that they were part of Brett Gurewitz's newly formed Epitaph Records. It's actually wild to think about it, but even back then, 40 years ago, the band found a way to balance the chaotic punk music with a bit of an intellectual flavor. Their early days are interesting because they're peers with the likes of the Circle Jerks and Black Flag, but they feel just a hair younger than those bands. Despite How Could Hell Be Any Worse becoming a very important inflection point in punk history, the band would not replicate their sound or critical success on their sophomore release, Into the Unknown. I mean, they couldn't even replicate their core lineup. Jay Bentley just peaced out in the middle of recording the thing. So what happened to them? Well, the explanation probably requires a video of its own, but in a nutshell, Bad Religion went the way of many punk bands of the early 80s. They put out like a prog new wave album, but this was not well received by that community, nor by the fan base they had already cultivated. They didn't become Blondie or Billy Idol. Instead, they became a flash in the pan.
Get out of my way, Billy. You're gonna get hurt.
Oh, yeah?
Don't you talk to Billy Idol that way.
And I think they were indicative of punk music as a whole in the 80s. You know, you had the burst in the 70s where it's not only the music is happening, but the fashion is happening, and it really is this cultural moment. Well, that kind of goes away, and parts of it morph into new wave, and other parts of it just go straight up underground. And there was a point in the 80s where Bad Religion basically went dark. Members went on with their individual lives. Graffin dove deep into his academic career, while Brett honed his chops as a producer, engineer, and label manager. At the same time, Jay bounced around from band to band. But as we all know, the story does not end there. is up, everyone? It's Tuesday. Behave, Mike. Back at it. We had to take last week off. So I had some issues going on. Had to take care of some business. Could have done the show, but it would have been very, very bad. Now we're back here a week later, and it's only going to be very, very average. What's up, guys? Good to see you. I missed you guys after a whole week of not being able to sit down to chat.
Architect resides right here.
Get started in 1 second. What a week it's been. What a week and a half it's been. So happy to talk about the recipe for hate. I gotta tell you guys, it has been so fun just being captured in Recipe for Hate land over the last couple of days. And I'm glad to get back into it. What's going on with you guys, though? How are things going? Chat's a little quiet. There's a few of you in here. It's been busy if you're the type that goes to check out live punk rock. There's been a lot in the last couple of days. We've had, especially in our world that we talk about on this channel, the NoFX wrap-up shows have been going full blast alongside with Punk Rock Bowling, which looked like a blast. A lot of it up online. Go check out there if you didn't get to attend. I didn't get to attend. I've been stuck here in my house all weekend. It's been a bummer. Good for you, archivist. Good for you to go on vacation. I hope you're having fun, man. Hope it's a good one. It's that time of year. As I mentioned, I want to say on a stream about a week or two ago that my schedule would be lightening up a little bit. That kind of starts this week. And I should be able to push out more content. I did start a third YouTube channel, but I won't push that out just yet. And it's just going to be a YouTube channel that's made up basically of all the things that we talk about on these streams that doesn't really fit into either of my other two YouTube channels. So there'll be a third channel that's just kind of a clips channel. And just a way for us to use basically every bit of these streams and for me to turn them into content.
Faces of the starving millions. He's the power of the man. He's the fuel that drives the clan. He's the motive and the conscience of the murderer. He's the preacher on TV. He's the false sincerity.
What do you guys think of this version of American Jesus by Robin Adele Anderson? Now, she has a ton of great punk songs on her channel and a bunch of other different covers. I just thought her version of American Jesus was a perfect one to kick us off about our discussion about Recipe for Hate.
He's a form letter that's written by the big computers. The nuclear bombs, the kids with no moms, and I'm fearful he's inside of me.
Man, that sounds like that mom country music that people are listening to. You can just sneak in a punk rock song right in the middle.
And we've got the American Jesus. See him on the interstate. We've got the American Jesus exercising his authority.
Throws you off a little bit, 87, doesn't it? It just throws you off just a little bit.
And we've got the American Jesus fostering their shame on faith. And we've got the American Jesus overwhelming millions every day.
Well, I mean, things couldn't continue forever, right? And then you had some unfortunate tragedies there, archivists, so just couldn't keep going. Just kind of the way things shook out. All right. So that is just a little introduction to what I think we all know is the song from this album that we're talking about tonight, Recipe for Hate, American Jesus. American Jesus, one of the most iconic punk rock songs of all time. Definitely one of the most iconic ones from this era. I think you got to take out like Linoleum and then Come Out and Play, maybe Roots Radical or Time Bomb or Ruby Soho, one of those three, and then you go with American Jesus from this era. And I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of. If there is, let me know in the chat or in the comments. But those are the ones that kind of come to mind right off the top of my head as far as big songs from this era that came out of this album. Now, this album, let me see if I can pull up just the basics on it, just the wiki. Don't need to get nothing fancy here. It's a great music video. One of the first, I think, punk rock music videos that a lot of people actually saw, which is kind of cool. But Recipe for Hate, in my opinion, it's got a really weird legacy. It's got the legacy actually of a bit of a missed milestone in the band's history, or I should say, an underrated milestone. Not necessarily missed. People regard this song American Jesus as a big song, but I think Recipe for Hate actually kind of gets lost a little bit because it comes out at such an awkward time. Recipe for Hate isn't the album that necessarily shoots Bad Religion into stardom, but it's the last one before they signed to a major label. And part of the release is actually on a major label. It's like distributed through a major label. So it's equal parts an Epitaph record and equal parts an Atlantic record. And I think that's why it kind of gets squeezed out. And in a second, we're going to go down this run of eras of Bad Religion albums. And I wonder what you think about these eras and your opinions of them. I am definitely going to value, but I think this is one that is caught a little bit in between eras, so it's a little bit of an awkward album. And then when you look at the album from an actual sound standpoint, there's nothing else in the Bad Religion catalog that's quite like Recipe for Hate, which makes it such a unique piece of output by the band. Let's talk about some of those Bad Religion eras. Let's see if I can get something going here. Okay. So, let's see if my nifty little slideshow will work here on the stream. Doing it live. So in the background, we will have a little bit of Bad Religion playing this weekend at Punk Rock Bowling, just to kind of fill in on the little graphics here. Now, if you take the eras of Bad Religion, I think there's a few that can be agreed upon. There is what I like to call the old school punk era, which is their initial era, which has their initial EP, of course, the release of How Could Hell Be Any Worse. And even if you want to include Back to the Known, I would definitely say you can. It is in that era, even though there's an album in between. And it's one of the funner eras of the band. I think there's a lot of old school fans that really like this era and wish this is where they would have stuck. But this is not exactly what they used to reinvent punk rock music the way they did a few years later. From there, we know which era comes next. It is the ever unfortunate era of what I'm going to call the WTF era, which of course is quite simply the Into the Unknown era. Just like many of their peers, Bad Religion decided to make a new wave album. And they really ate you-know-what as a result of it. Seriously, what the hell was Bad Religion thinking trying to make a new wave album? Who would have thought that would have ever been good? Nobody. But they were listening to all this prog. They were doing all this stuff. Yes, I know it has its fans. No, I'm not going to give it its current respect. And it kind of killed the band. The band basically couldn't gain any traction. Jay Bentley literally left in the middle of recording for Into the Unknown. But that wasn't the end of the story. Eventually, after Graffin's little trip to Wisconsin, they would all come back. They would all reform. The band would get back together in its truest form and reach what I like to call their Epitaph Prime. And in their Epitaph Prime era, you have several albums that can be considered within that purview. You, of course, have the bomb that was Suffer, that changed really all of popular music and probably doesn't get enough credit for that. From there, you go to No Control, which just took it to another level, and you have even more iconic and lasting Bad Religion songs. You go from there to Against the Grain, where it gets even bigger, gets even better. Generator is still an Epitaph record, but I would say if you were mad about this change of sound of Bad Religion, Generator is where that change started. It was a bit of a growing pains album for the band. And then you get to Recipe for Hate, which I think is their most dynamic album at that time. with the exception of Into the Unknown. The 80 to 85 CD is a good way to get it without the Into the Unknown. Yep. Bad Religion, whether they authorized the comps or not, always had really amazing comps that are nice captures of the different eras that they are involved in. Now, on this Epitaph Prime slide that I have up here, obviously I kept up Recipe for Hate because it was recorded on Epitaph, it's recorded with Brett, and it's even toured on with Brett. But from there, that was the album that got them to the point of the Atlantic era. Now, I kind of think Stranger Than Fiction you could really categorize as sort of an Epitaph release. It didn't come out on Epitaph, although part of the imprint was on some of the pressings of the label, but you could see right there, Mr. Brett is front and center. He did help write a lot of the album. But after that, we kind of know how the experiment went on the major label. The Gray Race, No Substance, and The New America. Not bad albums, but in my opinion, the band really, really missed the presence of Brett Gurewitz. Yes, Dr. Graffin is an all-time great songwriter. I will not ever question that. That is absolute 100% truth. But part of what makes Bad Religion great is the combination of him and Mr. Brett and how they kind of feed off each other's songs. They even sing each other's songs on occasion. And that was the special sauce that Bad Religion was missing in that era. At the stop of this stream, I gave you guys a little preview of the video I made that expresses this era that I absolutely love, which is, of course, the return to Epitaph era. Now, I know these aren't the only other records they did on Epitaph, but I think these ones are very specific to their return on top. I could almost put this their Kings of Warp Tour era. You could call this as well, which, of course, Process of Belief, Empire Strikes First, and New Maps of Hell. All great, I think, almost unquestioned classics from the band. And then I think you have the Legacy era of The Descent of Man, True North, and Age of Unreason. I didn't really think the Christmas album necessarily belonged here, but these are albums that are still very good. They're still on Epitaph, and they're still Bad Religion albums of value. It's not like they're not trying when I say the Legacy era, but they're so legendary at the point when they start making these albums that they don't even really need to make them. They just kind of do. If they didn't make these albums, they would be absolutely fine as a band and could still keep on touring. But it is cool that we do get new music from them, and maybe we'll get some more new music here in the near future. Let's see. Where did I go? There I am. All right. Now, when you go through those eras of Bad Religion, I don't know which one is your favorite. For me, I would have to go back and forth between that Epitaph Prime era and really the return to Epitaph era. Although I'd probably take the Epitaph Prime era as the greatest collection of songs that they have over those 4 albums. There's really nothing else like it that a band has in such a condensed amount of time. And I think the other thing that really got emphasized in the Do What You Want book is the lead time that Bad Religion had whenever they wrote these records. Bad Religion had new records written before the other one was released. And I think this happened like 5 times in a row. And it just goes to show the songwriting prowess of Dr. Graffin and Brett, and then the ability of the band to execute it. And the band's really at such a prime position in their performances here. I know they don't have Brooks Wackerman yet, but they're amazing live in the era, and they're building their live show, and they're maturing as people and as musicians. But it was really weird that they would go on tour and they would know what their next album was going to be in full. They had it almost done, but they had to tour on the album that they were actually promoting, the one that they were actually there to sell. So like by the time they went on tour for Suffer, I think No Control was written. By the time they went on tour for No Control, they had Against the Grain written. By the time they went on tour for Against the Grain, Generator was written. And by the time they went on tour for Generator, Recipe for Hate was written. So if there's ever like a weird lead time in some of the song lyrics, I think that actually explains it, because there's a lot of Recipe for Hate that's clearly written as a response to the George H.W. presidency, even though it comes out in the latter part of it, specifically like the Gulf War invasion and all that stuff. But you got to remember, most of Recipe for Hate is written in like early 1992. It's written way before the actual songs went to press. And I think American Jesus is a perfect example of just that. So in talking about Recipe for Hate, I think we got to talk about a bunch of like peaks and valleys here that the band went through. Bad Religion's been around for 40 years now. They did a decade stream just to emphasize how long they have been around, and boy, they have been around for some years. And again, there's different eras and there's different peaks in those eras. I think you can say Suffer is a peak. I think you can say Process of Belief is a peak. but that leaves out a few other ones. And I think it leaves out Recipe for Hate and where they were at the time. Now, before we get into Recipe for Hate, let's crank back and kind of focus on just how important Suffer really, really was. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to my archives here. You know me, I love my archives. And that's the wrong spot. Let me see. Let's go back to the 1994 documentary, a favorite of ours on this channel. And yes, Archivist, I did look it up and I didn't realize, hey, the documentary is actually like landlocked. That is kind of insane. But let's hear them, in their own words, talk about the importance of Suffer.
I mean, very few good records came out from 85 to 89. Of course, with the exception of Bad Religion, Suffer. That's what invigorated our whole scene. That's what changed everything.
But by then, the music scene had changed completely because it was mostly, 80s metal had gotten huge. And that's all our punk friends grew their hair long and joined metal bands. And at the time we made Suffer, there was a real desert in the music, in the punk music scene. And we sort of offered a little bit of a revamped style of the early 80s punk. And by that time, Brett's skills in the studio were better. And so we became more of a high fidelity punk band in 1987 when we released Suffer. And I guess that was a eye-opener for a lot of people.
Well, Suffer was the first time I heard a punk band do 3-part harmonies.
I think that was kind of the start of something new. It was sort of a melodic kind of thing that people hadn't really done before, hadn't done well.
So I started Epitaph proper really in like 87. And at that time I signed L7.
And it's a point that should be emphasized. The rise of Suffer really goes along with the rise of Epitaph, because Epitaph probably doesn't really get off the ground as a label if Suffer doesn't hit the way it is. It probably just disappears as another like obscure punk label that was still putting out punk. There's kind of a misconception that they didn't put anything out after Into the Unknown. They did, but it was stuff that was good, but nothing that quite hit on the same level that Suffer did.
I signed the Little Kings and I signed Bad Religion. Also in 87, I had just gotten clean and sober. So like when I was a kid, I was a real partier and became pretty heavily addicted to drugs. And I got clean April 14th, 1987. And just right around the time that I started writing Suffer. And so I basically got clean and sober. I needed something to focus on and put all my energy into, and that was it. It was the new, the renewed Bad Religion, and
I think it was kind of just one step at a time for.
Hold on there, Dexter. Just hold on 1 second. Now, as you can see there, it just really showed the emphasis of Suffer, and now Suffer is interesting because Suffer does something that I don't think people quite realize. Suffer predates a lot of the other albums that were super influential in the 90s. So, going back to our little slideshow here, let's see if I have it on here. No, I don't. Well, there's a preview to stuff we're going to see in a second. No, okay. So, Suffer needs to get credit for being nothing else of way ahead of the curve as far as influencing guitar-driven music that would be popular later in the decade. So the way we tell the narrative, and I think it's told like this for a reason, and I don't think it's inaccurate, is basically that 1991 hits, Nevermind hits, and the music business is just forever changed. And there's quite a bit of truth to that. But I think that oversimplifies things, and it doesn't tell the story of the whole decade. There had to be like a soup for that to exist in. I think it also undersells the influence of like the guy you're seeing on my screen right now, Dexter Holland, and of Green Day in creating popular music that went on for the rest of the decade, not just the early 90s, although grunge was still very influential in the late 90s. We had that post-grunge stuff that was... Bleh. Nobody likes that post-grunge stuff. Anyway, So we had that stuff in that era, and like Green Day needed a roadmap to go off of. NoFX and Rancid and The Offspring, all of them, they needed a roadblock to go off of. And Suffer and those early Bad Religion releases really serve as that type of roadblock, a building block, not a roadblock. Roadblock is something in the way. This is a building block, a building block. Let's listen to a little more about the rise actually in this time of Bad Religion.
So it was Nirvana, and then once kids got into that, then it was easy to get into Smashing Pumpkins, and then maybe they got into Rollins or whatever. And it just got, little by little, a little bit more aggressive, and bands like us and our friends were just a few steps away.
Although the grunge and punk scenes were not aligned, the fact that distorted guitars were now ruling the airwaves sent the major labels on the hunt for the next big thing.
We didn't get our deal with Atlantic until 1993. So, and then 94 was a very big year.
This guy, a supreme #1 meatyhead.
So, will you quit the band soon?
I'm firing everybody and starting Bad Religion Mach 2.
What's your comment on this?
I want to borrow you for a second.
It wasn't really until then that we even had a chance, but from the very early days we thought it'd be great to be on a real label. You know, Epitaph wasn't, until the early 90s, Epitaph was still just run out of Brett's garage, basically. And so when we were kids, it was our dream to be on a big label.
Bad Religion was a good, solid build. They got popular. They started drawing. It just started happening for them fast, and they made very smart records.
They absolutely made smart records, and that's always been a cornerstone of them, right? Bad Religion's not stupid. I mean, look at my guy over here. My man's literally the doctor of punk rock. We call him Dr. Graff. And so Bad Religion obviously makes smart records, but are still aggressive and angry. And that's what's kind of amazing about Recipe for Hate, is that it's less flowery and theoretical as some of their other albums, and more straightforward, and I would honestly say more straightforward in a truly political kind of sense. Let's go into Do What You Want. Let's check out some stuff from the book. And this talks about where they were at, building out that last clip of kind of the rise of them. Bad Religion was no longer a small hardcore band from the early 80s that a handful of... Let me start that over again. Bad Religion was no longer a small hardcore band from the early 80s that a handful of fans looked forward to seeing on a rare occasion the band rolled through town. When the band set out for its third consecutive trip to Europe, the Bad Religion was well on its way to becoming a punk powerhouse. That's when the cracks in the foundation began to show. Now, what cracks in the foundation are they talking about? Well, specifically to this book, you have a lot of references to Jay Bentley having a really tough time in the early 90s, and something that isn't talked about as much. When we talk about personal issues within Bad Religion, we tend to focus on Mr. Brett, because Mr. Brett obviously had a lot of drug issues in the 90s, and it affected him, it affected the band, and it affected the label. Well, someone else who had their issues was Jay Bentley. Now, Jay Bentley is a guy that seems to have it more together, he's more naturally on the wild side. Therefore, he seems to more naturally have it together. But he was struggling in this era with the extra attention that they were getting, because it was expanding, it was growing. They were still young men. They weren't really ready to be rock stars yet, even if that was ultimately what it was that they were pursuing. Brett had the business side of it. Graffin had his academics to work on. It was really only the music for Jay, and Jay had to deal with it, and he had to deal with the rise of fame. Not only the rise of fame, but Jay really seemed to take criticism of the band pretty seriously. Now, we're going to watch a clip about some of the criticism of the band, and we're also going to read about just a little bit of the criticism of the band in this time period. Just a quick clip right here.
Yeah, we received a lot of backlash, but I wouldn't say from fans. I'd say from what we call the punk police, and people who talk about the rules of punk and how this is punk, but that is not. Those are, to me, some of the most uninteresting people to hang around, and those are the ones who did most of the criticizing.
I like how they're using some lagwagon music there to make that point. Now, as I mentioned, though, they were getting plenty of backlash. And in fact, is it right there? No, it's in the other room. I made all these notes, all these books, and I literally can't find where I set the physical books down because I'm Rob and I do weird stuff like that. On the Graffin book, though, all his writings about Recipe for Hate really seem to focus on the fact that these guys were now becoming like these punk spokesmen in this era, and they're being asked to do interviews, and they're getting criticized for the things that they say. And Graffin never really comfortable, as if you go back and watch my video about Greg Graffin being a punk punk paradox. He's never quite comfortable in that spot as being the spokesman for punk. And it's interesting because he's an intellectual guy that likes to reflect on a lot of things, but he just didn't really like being the head spokes guy for punk. So they had to weather a lot of this criticism in a way that I think was fairly unprecedented for a band. And as I mentioned in the book, they go on to talk about Jay and his issues. And Jay actually got his stuff together in the 90s. Now, he would fall off the wagon again in the 2000s, but that's a story for another day. At least for the 90s, he had it together. But here's how they reference the environment that they were in this time period. While Jay was changing his ways in LA, another transformation was underway in the Pacific Coast in Seattle, Washington, when a little-known band by the name of Nirvana released an album that changed the rock and roll landscape. Although it didn't happen overnight when Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit broke through the airwaves, the world stood up and took notice. Here was a song with distorted guitars, thunderous drums, and lyrics that didn't make a whole lot of sense, but were presented in a way that was arresting and in your face. And they were playing it on the radio. To record companies, Nirvana smelled like money, but to independent bands across the country, it smelled an awful lot like punk. And that is super interesting because I think Nirvana has a really weird legacy right now in the punk rock space. On the one hand, it is absolutely unquestionable that Nirvana and the grunge movement bore itself out of punk rock. If you look at some of those early interviews and talk to people that knew the guys of Nirvana at the time, they didn't really think of themselves as playing a new style of music. They viewed themselves as playing their region's version of punk rock. It was punk rock. Now, by the time it got to the top, and by the time grunge had codified itself as a movement and this cultural force, I don't think it was in any way having any pretenses of punk rock. Although I think that was an easier reference point versus some of the other stuff. Like, even though like there's a lot of connections between, say, like bands like Guns N' Roses and Metallica, other bands that are selling a lot of records at the same time. One of them was clearly most recently a punk band, and that band would have been Nirvana. And so I think when you have this whole notion of alternative rock in the 90s, punk rock has a really weird relationship to it. Because what is alternative rock? I think alternative rock can take on a few different forms. In my head, when I think of alternative rock, I automatically just think of like Nirvana and grunge, because to me that is like shorthand for alternative rock. And I think from a capital A alternative, capital R rock standpoint, that is what alternative rock is. When you think of modern alternative, it's a lot of that indie stuff that, quite frankly, I don't really care for, can't get into. It's not for me, but it is a genre of itself. It also can just mean alternative rock radio, and that's where punk rock comes in, because I think punk rock and pop punk always has a relationship where they're kind of adjacent to it. Like, you know, Green Day is obviously a punk band, and you could say a pop punk band, but they very much have got a lot of airplay and a lot of benefit off of alternative radio and being kind of considered in the vein of alternative rock. Same could be said about bands like Blink-182, even though I think they're more acknowledged, at least generically respected, as a pop punk band. And that's what's interesting about a band like Bad Religion, especially in this era, because the defining lines weren't so defined. Grunge is big. There's this thing of like alternative music that is kicking up, and then there's bands like Bad Religion that are doing alternative music and they're in their alternative scene, but they're clearly bringing the melodic punk rock to the mainstream in this way. Even if it's not mass produced, they're the ones that's bringing it. Like they're kind of peers with like Fugazi and REM and all these other like intellectual college rock bands, but they're bringing the punk rock. That's what they're bringing. That's the flavor that they're cooking up, and the masses, to the point that the masses were actually consuming them, are consuming them. I need to take a sip of tea. I've been talking uninterrupted for a really long time. Just entertain yourself watching Bad Religion play at Punk Rock Bowling. I thought it would be helpful, though, for us to actually check out what it was like when Bad Religion was being thrust into this mainstream. Now, we have a video here from MTV's 120 Minutes, which they kind of started to get picked up on as an MTV band. As you mentioned, they had a product to sell. They had the American Jesus video. And so with having a video, usually comes on and playing the little game on MTV. So here's some of their conversation, and we can pull a few things out of this. From October 10th of 1993. So a few months after Recipe for Hate was released, and when it already became known that the follow-up to Recipe for Hate, Stranger Than Fiction, would be on Atlantic Records. I clicked on the wrong one.
Welcome back to MTV's 120 Minutes. I'm Louis Largent. This is Brett, and that's Greg, and they're from Bad Religion. Not your atypical, uneducated loser punk band, but...
Yes, we are atypical.
You are atypical in what way?
We're not typical. Sorry to correct you.
That's okay. But
we are educated, though.
A very fascinating thing about you guys, now I'm not sure exactly what your educational background, but you guys are like Rhodes Scholar geniuses. I know that. What is your...
Brett has been on Rhodes scholarship for the last 4 years for a quarterbacking, actually.
I'm almost a Rhodes Scholar. I'm a high school dropout.
Are you...
But it's practically the same thing.
Okay.
Okay, can't hear it. Hold up.
Now, Greg, you're...
I guess I'm the only one who formally has an education, but...
Is the audio still messed up, Archivist? Let me know. It's showing that it's outputting.
But,
and your education...
That's not the only unique quality of the band.
I know, but it's a pretty unique quality considering you are Ivy League, aren't you?
Well, I'm getting my PhD at Cornell, yeah.
PhD for what?
Zoology.
Now, how does that relate to the band? Is that something you're just interested in?
It's something that I've pursued education ever since the band started.
Thanks, 87.
I was one of the few members who stayed in high school. It didn't make me much of a better person, actually, but I continued on to college and did the band.
Now, this, if you look at it, and Graffin talks about it in his book, he was super awkward, specifically in this interview, because he didn't know like what to be. Because he really was like, I'm a dad who's a PhD guy who's kind of doing my Bad Religion thing as sort of a side job, and you look at it, he is pretty awkward and pretty uncomfortable. And this dude, to be fair to him, he's not like when we watched those Rancid interviews a couple weeks ago. Like Matt Pinfield really had a way with the bands that he was with, and was able to get a lot out of them.
You know, sort of on the side as a hobby, and. As I got more ensconced in education, the band got more popular, and so it became increasingly difficult to balance the two. But still, surprisingly, I'm still balancing them.
So now was it difficult having him out of the band? Were you guys, did you think it was going to go on, or was it never in doubt that Bad Religion was going to continue well into the 90s?
You know, we never set long-term goals for Bad Religion. It was...
And what's ironic about this is the interview was asking about the commitment of Graffin to the band, but not really realizing it's Gerwitz who's going to be out in a couple of months. It's not Graffin. Graffin's going to be the sole consistent member through the entire history of Bad Religion. Always
getting together, writing songs, making records, and so it never really came up. But you know, we've been lucky enough and prolific enough to keep making records. So
it's amazing. You guys are one of the few LA punk bands that's actually survived to this decade. Although Circle Jerks and Fear, I guess Social D kind of counts, but you guys still have the spirit of punk rock. Did you ever think you'd make it this far?
Well, you know, punk rock isn't cancer. You don't have to survive it.
I know. You're right.
So
I love that line.
Say that.
When you look
You
back
just
at the
survived because it appears to be that there was an epidemic crash of
Right.
all the bands that started in LA. And in that case, it's true. But I think that was self-motivated by the individual bands. We always believed there was more to our music that wasn't reaching people, and that it never has, still hasn't reached its full potential.
But it is surprising to last this long for any band of any genre. I mean,
This is true.
rock bands don't usually last 13 years.
You guys are on your 7th album now, right? This is number 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I guess. Well, we're on our 8th because we're writing the next one.
There you go. So we're going to see a new one from...
And again, it's already written. It's already out. It's not out, but like they're done with Stranger Than Fiction at this point. Even though they're still very much promoting Recipe for Hate.
Your album, which features Jeanette, who is going to be here a little later on. And do you guys know a lot of the bands in LA? Jeanette, of course, Concrete Blonde, LA band.
Yeah, we've known Jeanette for about 10 years. And
had no problem coaxing her into coming down and singing?
No, none whatsoever.
We've always wanted to, and
That's a good point, and that's a good contrast. 87. That's true because, like Stevenson kept the Descendants. Well, he didn't keep the Descendants going. He's formed all, but I don't think he makes the distinction between the two bands. Bad Religion, though, I really think ran, even though like the machine was getting worn out at this point that we're talking about, and the strains and the cracks were starting to show. I think Graffin always had such a feel for balance and a feel for wanting to do both things in his life that he figured a way to do both of them. And I think also having Jay and Brett do so much on the business side that Graffin was really allowed to be talent really helped the band be able to do that. And then to make these odd arrangements going forward, to bring in Baker and have Gurwitz just as a studio member and a writer, but still very much an active participant in Bad Religion. Bad Religion really mastered how to grow for decades as a punk rock band and still kind of have a real life and do your own real things.
it's never been convenient. She's always either been on tour when we were recording or...
Yeah. Last year she was supposed to sing on the record Generator, and she was in London working on her record at the time. So this year she happened to be in L.A. when we were doing vocal overdubs, and it just worked perfectly, and she wanted to.
And here it is, Struck a Nerve from Bad Religion here on MTV's 120 Minutes. Very, very loud in the studios here tonight.
We're going to make a racket.
This is MTV Plugged, right?
Plugged in times 50 with you guys. So you have your own record.
Which is ironic there because they're the reason the K-Rock Unplugged isn't exactly unplugged. Go look that up, folks.
Label Epitaph, which just signed a deal with Atlantic Records, right?
So look at how the misinformation was kind of going right there. Let's play that little section again real quick.
Right. Plugged in times 50 with you guys. So you have your own record label, Epitaph, which just signed a deal with Atlantic Records.
So when you think about some of the backlash, there was probably people who thought that it wasn't just Bad Religion that had signed with Atlantic. They probably thought that Epitaph was becoming like a subsidiary of Atlantic at this point. And I don't even think like they were using Atlantic as a distributor the way they would with Warner in later years.
Right? Not? How is that working out? Are your labels being distributed through Atlantic Records? How's that working?
No, there's no affiliation with Epitaph and Atlantic. Bad Religion left Epitaph to go to Atlantic.
Because Epitaph, your little logo is on the new record with the Atlantic logo.
Yeah, it was just a gesture of good faith, and but there's really no affiliation.
So you still have.
But I think they did help with the distribution.
The label going. Now, who signs the bands on the label?
Me.
You sign them. Just you go out and find them.
Again, think about how much more information you would theoretically have as an interviewer going into that today.
I'm too busy reading.
Studying for your zoology exams.
Yeah, I just go out there and find them.
Now, was there any problem signing to a major label? Because you guys and like Fugazi.
And as I mentioned on the Rancid one, good God, these poor guys in these bands in the early 90s had to answer questions about major labels in every freaking interview. Never got asked about the music. Never got asked about any of this other stuff. Brett had to meet Interscope and Suge Knight. I don't recall that story, but that's funny. The punks going to meet major label stories are always funny. I like the one that Anti-Flag tells, where I think they go to Jimmy Iovine's office, and he asks them to the anti-flag guys asked them to turn down the music because it was too loud for the punk rockers. I thought that was amazing.
As you're like the two truly independent like bands, and then you made the move to major labels. Like, have you had any like fans going, "Hey man, you sold out, man. I remember when you were indie, and you were cool."
I bet you were just like that, weren't you?
No, I was never like that because I hate that mentality.
Yeah, well, it happens every year. I mean, even it was long before we decided to go to a different record company. There are certain people who always have certain criteria for why they like the band, and as irrational as we think it is, some people say, you know, once they moved from a 500-seat club to a 1,000-seat club, it was no longer my favorite band.
Right.
So there are all these.
There are like the irrational hate. It could also just be like things are also never the same. So I think you can respect that viewpoint.
Weird criteria. I'm sure now that with the Atlantic move, there might be a few more who use the fact that we were on an independent label as a criterion for liking the band. But the fact is, the music isn't any different, and if you like us for the music, there's no reason not to be a Bad Religion fan.
Amen, brother. I totally agree with that. I want to ask you a question about your song, the closing song, I believe, on the album, Stealth. George Bush sample.
Yeah.
Is that a problem? Did you?
Not until now.
Yeah. Not very many people recognize that was George.
Mr. Bush.
Ministry sampled George Bush on New World Order, so I don't know what the legalities with sampling the former president of the United States is.
And we don't care.
Is that who it was?
Some CIA agents will be awaiting you as you finish your performance tonight.
You know, I saw Henry Kissinger today.
Oh, you did? Did you really?
Yeah.
Were you guys down the UN or something?
I was just having breakfast, and he was at the same restaurant, and
Kissinger, who just turned like 100 this week or something.
I sampled him.
Did you?
Yeah.
2 eggs over easy.
So I don't know what the legalities of sampling him are either, but we'll see.
More with Greg and Brett and a live performance from Bad Religion. Stay with us here on 120 Minutes.
At number 4, Wild America from Iggy Pop.
Welcome back to 120 Minutes. I'm Louis Largent. Bad Religion are here. Brett and Greg from the band. Hello. Eddie Vedder made his way on American Jesus, which we just saw a little bit of, I believe. How did Eddie Vedder?
Now, this is funny. I know they tell a story, but it's like they didn't really need Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder like went to them. Like Eddie Vedder, Dave Grohl, all those guys that like are so venerated now. They were punk rock fans. They were fans of these guys.
Come into the mix.
He wasn't on the video.
We can't say his name, can we?
Yeah, we can say it.
Oh, do we just...
EV.
Okay.
EV.
EV.
So EV was made his way on the album. How did you guys coax him into doing that?
That is insane, Archivist, that they made the cut on that.
You know, there wasn't a hell of a lot of coaxing.
Just a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's not true.
You know, we got acquainted on the road. We did several shows together on the festival circuit in Europe. And when we were doing vocal overdubs for Recipe, coincidentally, he was in L.A. And we were talking on the phone, inviting him down. It was very spontaneous and just, you know, cash.
Yeah, he had come backstage, and we had talked as, you know, I talked to a lot of people backstage, and I like meeting fans and whatnot. And about 4 years ago, he came backstage at one of our shows in San Diego.
Wasn't he a roadie in San Diego? Wasn't he equipment guy in San Diego?
I never asked him how he got backstage. But, you know, he was...
Yeah, and Eddie Vedder did stuff with the Ramones. For Eddie Vedder, I don't really care for Pearl Jam that much, but he's definitely a punk rock dude.
We just started talking, and then, like Brett said, it was funny to see this guy who, you know, I had met backstage, now playing in a very well-known band.
Wow.
But, yeah, we became friends.
What's your following? Like, I lived in L.A. You guys are giant in L.A. Like 2 sold-out nights at like a 4,000-seat venue. Yeah. What's your following like in the rest of the country?
Somewhat attenuated.
Yeah. No, we're playing...
50 Cent word about it.
But I think that actually goes to show, and I don't know whether they're going to talk about it here or not, but like Bad Religion could play California, and Bad Religion really could tour the UK. That's why they actually went to the UK so often in that era, because it was a very profitable market for them. Still is. That's still why they go there. And so, like, they were rock stars in some parts of the world, and then they were just regular dudes off the street in other sections and other communities. It was an interesting contrast for the band, for sure. I'm gonna have to check that out, Archivist. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, we're playing 1,000-seaters everywhere. Yeah, which is about a fourth as big as what we play in LA. Of course, in New York we're playing Roseland, and it's probably going to sell out. So.
That probably holds as many as the Palladium.
I think so. Yeah. So big cities were real big. Yeah. And
if you averaged it all out, it'd probably be 1,500 to 2,000 seats every night.
And no mosh pits, I'm sure. At all.
We don't allow that.
Do you guys mind people coming up on stage when you're playing? Do people come up and jump up on stage and then jump?
No, I like it.
You like it?
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, I like it as long as they don't hit my microphone. Can you get a close-up on that?
We call it slamming.
I got a couple chips.
Oh, is it slamming?
We call.
And they go on in this interview to debate whether slam dancing or mosh pit is the correct nomenclature. Sound off in the comments or in the chat. So that kind of sets the stage of where Bad Religion is at the time in the release. There's just a lot of pressure. Like, this is all just moving extremely, extremely fast when Recipe for Hate comes out. Let's see, do I got any more from the book here to sort of show off to you guys? Here we go. By the end of 1992, fueled by Who's Gret? By the end of 1992, fueled by Greg and Brett's prolific songwriting and powered by a record label that was getting bigger every day, Bad Religion had produced 5 records in 5 years, 4 new albums plus 80 through 85, Archivist. With another record in the works, they were at the peak of their productivity. The media was finally paying attention to them, and more often than not, found things to criticize. Critics were either quick to point out the way they deviated from their platform, or criticize them for sticking too closely to it. Occasionally, music critics praised their intelligent opinions expressed by the band's lyrics, but the most of these critics took a backhanded swipe at the punk rock community, saying that Bad Religion's lyrics were too cerebral and too nerdy, as if punkers weren't capable of comprehending the songs. In fact, Bad Religion's fans proved to be much more willing to engage in the material than their critics. I find that so very fascinating. Like, hold on, let me put myself back on here. Are punks too stupid to listen to Bad Religion is basically what that criticism boils down to. And it's funny because, to me, the way I think of punk rock, and a lot of this is created by Bad Religion, I think of punk rock as a very, very intellectual exercise. Now, you could have an intellectual exercise that is sweaty and slamming in the pit and all that. Like, that doesn't make it intellectual or non-intellectual. But I think of punk rock, I think in a lot of the ways that Graffin thinks of it. Obviously, I'm not a PhD, so I don't got that in me to do it the way Graffin does, to break things down on that level. I need the thesaurus when I'm going for it. But I do think of punk rock as a bit of an intellectual pursuit. And it's kind of ridiculous to think that other people wouldn't have got into that. Like, I know college rock doesn't necessarily mean college students, but I think in the Graffin book, he talks about, like, really admiring bands like REM and Fugazi and those ones that he thought were really like a thinking man's band that had roots that were, quite frankly, very similar to theirs. Again, just because they brought out the punk rock side and probably brought a little bit different audience to their shows than the REMs or the Fugazi, doesn't mean they were any less valid in doing that, and doesn't mean that punk rock fans wouldn't have got it. Like, it's funny because, like, probably 10 years later, punk rock fans that were listening to Bad Religion are more thought of as like the snobby people that are overeducated and that are lecturing you about things. That might be more stereotypical of a Bad Religion fan than just like this total washout, burned out crust punk who like can't read and is missing teeth and all that good stuff. So we pretty much hit our timing perfect on this, guys. We did 1 hour for background on the album, and this wasn't the most comprehensive background of the album. I think we could do a much more focused one in the future. I just kind of wanted to give you the broad strokes of what was going on to establish the importance of this album, because they got really, really big in the course of this album. Now, it's a bit of chicken or egg. Did this album make them very big? Being on 120 Minutes, having American Jesus on there. Struck a nerve. They're on Conan. They're on all the late night shows. Did this make them very big? Was it just signing to Atlantic that made them very big? Is this album just incidental in that time period? I think those are a lot of questions that we're never really going to ask, but they're fun to think about and to explore. In the meantime, though, let's check out samples of the album from around the web and just sort of get a flavor of what the album was. Let's go with this version first. So there's plenty of good early Bad Religion footage, but there's also like some not so good. So we're gonna mix in a little bit more modern Bad Religion with some of the more old school stuff and trying mostly to just use covers and live performances to stay up on here. But let's kick this off with the song that kicked off the album. Of course, it's Recipe for Hate. Baker looks like a different person nowadays, doesn't he? And shout out Brooks. So that you think that, yeah, to my earlier point, archivist of the whole bigness of where Bad Religion was getting to. And I didn't emphasize it as much as I wanted to on the background section, but they are really influenced by that alternative rock wave. Like, they're riding that wave. While other bands rode the wave of Bad Religion and Green Day and The Offspring, Bad Religion is riding the wave of like alternative rock while also kind of creating it.
Can't you feel it? Can't see the promise of prosperity. It's overwhelming you and me, and up into psychologies. Ubiquitous complaining, we clinging like crazy do. Index such authority, it's best for all humanity. The spread of culture, sword of powers, vector of suffrage, a woman's self-degrees. Upon family.
Miss you, Hetson. That's a good point. It's such a good intro to an album, too. I think that's why it really worked.
The blood of the hybrid, it's just a recipe.
I know the lyrical concept of like, kind of questioning the conception of America from the beginning and this whole idea of the spread of culture and how that can be negative. And this is really powerful in 1993 also. Like, these are ideas that I think are much more in the mainstream thought right now. They weren't necessarily there in like Gulf War I.
We live in our ancestry, the fight for collective harmony. My father is underway, their victims are still here today. Now it's time to erase the story of my bogus made our history. Infiltrate is just a recipe for hate. A recipe for hate. The spread of culture, the sword of progress, vector of suffrage, a woman's self-degrees. The palm.
And by the way, the chapter that I pulled most of that stuff out of Do What You Want is called The Sword of Progress. So the obvious reference there.
Due to your vocation, the blood of the hybrid, it's just a recipe. Let's go!
Late 2000s too, Bad Religion was really on their game on a performance perspective. I mean, how can you not be with Brooks on the drums, Baker really just completely in the mix, and Graffin just really bringing it. The track layout on albums is a science that Bad Religion has mastered too. I heard some debate a couple weeks ago, though. I think it was on like Facebook or something, about people not liking how Age of Unreason was, where My Sanity was on there, and how it maybe threw things off a little bit. So you talk about track listing, and I think that's really interesting to talk about here, because we go from Recipe for Hate to Kerosene. Now, if you're like, you're old school, you're into Suffer, and you're into No Control, and you're into Against the Grain. Maybe you tolerate a Generator, but you didn't mind some of the changes, but they were okay. And then you hear Recipe for Hate, and you're like, fuck yeah. Bad Religion still got it. They're not changing at all. And then you hear Kerosene. And I think Kerosene throws people off a little bit. Definitely throws me off a little bit. On the Age of Unreason stuff, 87. And I love the song Kerosene, too. And I love the concept of it. Like, if you go deep on the lyrics about its statement on, like, homelessness and all that, which there's a lot of statements on poverty on this record. So then I don't think Bad Religion always hits on as well when they're talking more of the big ideas. This album, I think, is a lot less philosophical than a lot of the other Bad Religions. Not to say it's not intellectual. It's just a lot less maybe theoretical is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot more specifics. Like, you don't have to be as smart to understand Recipe for Hate as you do some of the other albums.
Song's called Kerosene.
This is presumably, I think, from the late 90s. No, it's Brooks. It's from the 2000s. The epicness isn't quite as emphasized on the live version. You also don't get the background vocals in quite the same way. In 87, that's the case with a lot of songs on this album, because this album has a little bit different of a production vibe. And so all the songs didn't really translate into these punk rock bangers the way Recipe for Hate does. Agreed, Archivist. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little later on like Man on a Mission. And it's funny, like the like country, obviously like cowpunk is a thing, right? And I think like the peak of that, or the most mainstream version of that, is probably Social Distortion. And there's plenty of country punk and cowpunk and all that. What's funny about Bad Religion doing this is I feel like Bad Religion, they're not like a sellout the way like a nerd would call them a sellout, but all pop punk is sort of derivative of whatever the mainstream music is at the time. That's why like early 2000s pop punk sounds like boy bands, because those were popular pop acts at the time. That's why pop punk now has like that hip hop vibe to it. Pop punk back then was pulling from pop culture, so you're pulling from alternative. You also think about how big country music was from a live perspective in like the 90s. Like that's like the Garth Brooks era where it's big. Like those are the biggest acts in the world are like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, and Garth Brooks. And so, Bad Religion is kind of getting in on it. And then let's face it, Graffin, although not a country music fan, is, from the country. Okay. So obviously the third song on Recipe for Hate is one that I'm sure all of you know to a really, 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 really specific level. But let's check out what the band actually had to say about it at one point. Interestingly, one thing Bad Religion was seldomly criticized for was its overwhelmingly negative view of Christianity. Once again, the most blatantly offensive thing about the band somehow escaped the attention of the morality police. This was surprising given that the U.S. government and its cohorts in the media invoked Christianity during the Gulf War, which was in full swing. Bad Religion challenged the toxic combination of religiosity and warmongering in Recipe for Hate's first single, American Jesus. The song opens with lyrics that reprise Bad Religion's earliest songwriting impulses. Written in response to President George H.W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, American Jesus attacks the American imperialism popped up with a bogus claim of Christian morality. The irony is so entrenched that it's easy to imagine someone hearing Bad Religion for the first time and interpreting the lyrics as an endorsement of the values they are critiquing. I think that's a very good point. In the third verse, however, the backup vocalist presents a counterpoint to the lyrics, clarifying the song's position. We don't need to study American Jesus too deep. I think we are all very aware both of its importance and its lyrical resonance. I don't think, you can say it's an inherently political song, but I don't think it's really a political song of left or right. It's more of against theocracy, I think, and doing things in the name of theocracy is the whole point of, American Jesus. Like, oh no, we got the good Jesus. We got the American one. And it's this Puritan work ethic, this conflation of anything American is inherently Christian and vice versa. And that type of mentality obviously can be used for great deals of harm. Whenever you are religiously justified in anything you're doing, then basically that's the ultimate form of justification, right? You don't really have to justify anything beyond that, at least in some people's minds. For our watch, though, I think we're going to just stick with the version that actually aired on 120 minutes.
For Hate, here they are performing live American Jesus. Take it away, boys.
How many of us very badly do that intro on the guitar, like all the time, right? When you just pick it up, do 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 do. Bobby.
I don't need to be a global citizen, 'cause I've lost my nationality. I'm a member of a growing.
This version sounds a little bit thicker. I don't even know what that means. I don't know if the bass is tuned a little bit differently, but it feels a little bit thicker than the album version, doesn't it? It might just be the recording. I don't know. And I don't know how it's filtering through to you guys either.
We impose our popularity. There are things that seem to pull us over, there are things that drag us down. But there's a power and a vital presence that's working all around. We've got the American Jesus, see him on the interstate. We've got the American Jesus, he helped build the president's estate.
I love how that opening riff just takes you on with the full band version. It's still going. It's just, it's thicker and it's bouncier once everyone else comes in, but it's still that basic riff, which a lot of this song is kind of arranged around. I know that, that chord pattern.
We got a place to go when we die, and the architect resides right here. We've got the American Jesus, fostering national faith. We've got the American Jesus, all the faces of the starving millions. The power of the man, the fuel that drives the clan. He's the motive and the conscience of the murder.
And then from a lyrical perspective, I love this section. Like, it's, you know, it's anything can be justified, and we're all part of this, right? And it's you know, it's a critique of our American way of life, I think, in a lot of ways, and then our critique of our influence over the world. You know, from the beginning part, you know, I don't need to be a global citizen because I'm blessed by nationality. I'm a member of a growing populace. All that stuff. I kind of fumbled it in my head. That's why I couldn't say. But you get it, like, hey, I'm special just because I was born here. It's like that old Chris Rock bit. And I think if you know what I'm talking about.
He's a preacher of today, the popularity, the format and the dream by the thing come true as a nuclear bomb. His kids with no moms and a triple that he's inside me. Yeah, we got the American Jesus, we have all the American Jesus. We got the American Jesus, exercising his authority. We got the American Jesus, conquering national fame. We got the American Jesus, all the while in millions every day. One nation under God, 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 one nation under God.
And there's our boys, Bad Religion, doing American Jesus on MTV. Now, there's plenty of covers. I love the Mike and his uke. They do a really good one, and it's got Jason Cruz, of course, doing vocals, and he does an amazing interpretation of it. Back in the day, 20 years ago, like next month on the 2003 Warped Tour, I remember Simple Plan banged out an amazing version of American Jesus live. There's also the YouTubers. They're like the reaction, like Christian YouTube couple. I think they're one called Vin and Sorry. They have an interesting video because they're obviously from a Christian perspective, and to have them break down those lyrics is something that's super interesting. Go ahead and check out their video on this song. It's too long. It's like an hour and a half long, and it was kind of too long for me to tease out clips of them talking about it. Maybe on the rewatch, I'll clip some of that stuff out. But it's interesting how their take on the song lyrically was like, it wasn't necessarily an anti-Christian message. That can just be a general criticism. And, you know, that's kind of where Bad Religion has to straddle that line sometimes. In their book, they say, like, you know, they talk about they're not for or against any religion. They're against bad religion. And, you know, having an American Jesus in their minds and how they put it is, in fact, a bad religion. All right, let's keep Recipe for Hate rolling, though. I don't want to spend too much time on American Jesus because we all know it. But let's go to Portrait of Authority. An often copied song title, by the way.
Okay, so what song you want to hear? All right.
This is in 96, by the way.
I don't understand it. Well, this is, I understand, the last day of a 3-day festival. We missed most of it because we were over across the Mediterranean. But I can't imagine it's also a special night because this is the last night of our European tour. We thought, what better place to end it than right here in Spain? Where we should have come back much earlier, and we are so sorry. Lo siento mucho. Here's a tune called Portrait of Authority.
Not a bad choice, Archivist. Not a bad choice.
Let's go. Nothing more, nothing less than icon on the wall, decoration and duress. That which man is trying to be, in some marble statues staring over me. And nobody has the will to tear it down. It determines wrong and right. But to me it's just a stereotype, and it makes us lose our sight.
The portrait of authority. Portrait of authority. You tell
Again, they're live. The background vocals don't quite come in to the way that they were on the album. And again, as he mentioned there, every one of these albums is produced by Brett. So Brett is getting stronger and stronger in the studio as he's producing his band, and he's producing NoFX, he's producing Rancid, he's producing Pennywise in this time, he's producing The Offspring. So he's really upping his game on the production side of things.
me that's what I'm supposed to be. Portrait of authority. You tell me that's what I'm supposed to be. Another time, another man, then a pressing intrusion and a plague across his land. And it haunts him every day. It tells him that he has no chance, his hopes is fade away. And he lives his life prepared to tear it down, but he can't muster the support. And to him it's just a stereotype of his lifelong fight. The portrait of authority. Portrait of authority. It embodies what he cannot be. Portrait of authority. It's what he cannot be. The portrait of authority. Portrait of authority.
I think there's a lot of tension on this album, and I think Portrait of Authority really brings out that kind of tension. It really describes it. From there, let's hear how they did Man on a Mission, because Man on a Mission is one of those songs that there's no way it can really translate well live. Like, I don't see it. And I barely previewed this. I just wanted to make sure the audio was good. That's all I checked out.
Here's a song called The Man with a Mission.
Because again, like, what kind of slide guitar do they have going on here? I don't know.
The Man with a Mission. Did I say that? Rescue me when I get too deep. There's nothing on top. Everyone is a hypocrite. Look to me, I'll save your soul. Well, somebody out there must be reading my mail. But everybody knows, follow me when you give up. Work for me, it'll serve you well. Everyone is a hypocrite. Look to me, I'll save your soul. Now somebody out there must be tapping my phone, 'cause everybody knows I am a man with a mission. I'm gonna fly you away.
See, Archivist, I don't think it's totally flat. I just think it loses that thing that it has. Because when you're listening to it on the album, you're just getting off of Portrait of Authority. Like I said, it has a nice tension. You're coming off of American Jesus, and then all of a sudden, like, what the hell was going on? That's a bummer. That's a bummer. 87 that you saw Bad Religion like that.
High above the noise and competition, Now somebody out there must be reading my mail. 'Cause everybody knows I am a man with a mission. Passing through Nürburgring today, I condemn you to fiery perdition. 'Cause I am a man with a mission. Oh yeah.
That's odd, man. That's a interesting experience. It's odd. It's different. Speaking of odd and different, I couldn't find a good live version of All Good Soldiers. And talk about a song that really only works in a studio environment. I gotta think All Good Soldiers does. But I love All Good Soldiers. What a unique thing to have on this album. You talk about like this being a 90s album, an alternative album. The song I'm thinking of most when I say that is All Good Soldiers. So I found what I believe is a live rip from somewhere that they played it. So just bear with it as I play this.
Here's one where syncopation is key. This song is called All Good Soldiers.
It's probably a weird song to get off live because there's a lot of electronics you can hear. It's like almost industrial sounding, but it has such a cool like message to it too. Like Bad Religion doesn't exactly take samples out on the road with them.
All good soldiers crack like ballers.
See, it kind of has that new metal quality where it just goes boom, 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 boom.
The time comes up to erase our balance. New boots and numbers on a chain. All good soldiers. All good. All the time when they march and shout. All good. All respectable marching. We'll go in when the president's son. Because the president believes in God. Like all good soldiers should. All good soldiers wave like warheads. When the fighting starts, you will be a cannibal, a cannibal, a cannonball. All good soldiers.
I actually think All Good Soldiers. I think All Good Soldiers. Now that I'm like listening to it back, I think it's actually a combination. It's like, you know, that gritty kind of like slower paced early 80s punk that Bad Religion was around but didn't really participate in. It's like that mixed with like a 90s industrial metal kind of vibe.
All good soldiers. All good. All the time when they march and shout. All good. All respectable marching and singing. We'll go anywhere the president says. Because the president believes in God. Like all good soldiers should. It's 6 a.m. I can see my brain. The graders are the weekly.
You know what, Archivist? It's their All Good Soldiers is their Generation Swine song. You'll get exactly what I mean by that.
Today is the day of my motherfucking friends. It's something I've been trying to remember. I had a dream on the wall that was 21 stories tall.
because the president believes he died. Like all good soldiers should.
I love All Good Soldiers. It's the unique. It's like that and Kerosene and Man on a Mission. That's what makes this album unique. That's what makes this album stand out. Probably makes some people not like this album, if we're being completely honest with you. But it's what gives it its flavor for sure. Let's move on to Watch It Die. Their concentration of black hair that these guys have in this era is just way too much for my normal sensibilities and what I'm used to. Like, I don't want that much dark hair in my Bad Religion. Yeah, he's got more of an edge to him, for sure. Amazing. Really good performance. Really underrated song too, I think, by them. We're gonna go on one of their late night performances of Struck a Nerve. Struck a Nerve is another one that it really employs that tension that I was talking about. That I think they do well. Of like there's an honest tension on this album that they really capitalize on, and it's what makes it a little less. Makes like the whole album feels a little claustrophobic in a good way.
All right. Critics around the world have raved about the latest album from my next guests. Here to perform a song from Recipe for Hate is Bad Religion.
Speaking of guys' appearances, can we just say that Brett looks really, really cool in the 90s? Like, it's really weird that he became this, like, philosophical looking guy that we know him as, like, you know, we, like, Lauren at the Tree of Mr. Brett, but he looks cool being all tall and skinny with his dark bottle glasses.
On a city bus, hard and a candy cane, and it isn't even Christmas. He sees a note in the obituary that his last friend has died. There's an infant clinging to his overweight mother in the cold as they go to shop for cigarettes, and she spends her last dollar on a bottle of vodka for tonight.
This is unmistakably 90s, though. I know it's bad. It's like just Bad Religion. It's punk rock, but this is clearly a product of the 90s. Everything about it just screams 90s.
And I guess it's stuck on her, like I had to squint my eyes. You can never get out of the line of sight. Like a barren winter lake, or a catch of unburned grain, like a tragic Rio dream. Well, I guess it struck a nerve. Every day I wonder if negative disposition is on my mind by superlatives, realizing very well that I am not alone. Introverted, I look to tomorrow for salvation, but I'm thinking optimistically, and a wave of overwhelming doubt turns me to stone. And I guess it struck a nerve, sent a murmur into my heart, with a second time and cracked the maze, like a magic speeding clock, or a cancer in our cells, a collision in the dark. I guess it struck a nerve. Watch out!
Just amazing. I'm just kind of getting lost in it. I love this song.
Try to close my eyes, but I cannot ignore the stimuli. If there's a purpose for us all, it remains a secret to me. Don't ask me to justify my life, 'cause I guess it struck a nerve, like a hand between my eyes.
Could use some of those BGVs right there, though, couldn't we?
You can never get out of the line of sight, like a magic speeding clock, or a cancer in our cells, a collision in the dark.
Boy, Jay's bass is really mixed into this, isn't it?
I guess it struck a nerve. Thank you.
Yay, it's like 12 o'clock at night. Woo! Going in. All right. We're going to have to, on some of these last ones, we're going to have to hit some covers and some acoustic versions just because they didn't play them live as much, or at least there's not as much footage of them live. But My Poor Friend Me, which I think is a really good song on its own, here's an interesting version here. Let's listen to Graffin acoustically.
I know a man who doesn't have many friends. I know a place he lives where trouble never.
Archivist, I'd be curious about your stance. I know you don't like the acoustic punk thing. How does that apply to Dr. Graffin? I feel like you could give him an exception.
Never ends. I know it's hard for him to read between the lines, and his days are getting so much shorter. He simply turns away and dons a bitter frown. His world is crumbling, his ship's weighted down. He doesn't care as long as he can wear the crown. I know this man all too well. It's my poor friend me, a portrayal of the great dichotomy. It's
this version's good, but God, the original version is amazing.
My poor friend me, and I'm running out of steam.
Was that Cold as Clay? Was that what that was called?
Lately I've come to see the solution, and it begins with me.
It's fair.
But I'm so fallibly human. I've picked the lock, but I will not turn the key. A people running scared, we live, breathe, and die. All too aware that time is slipping on by. We have solutions, but don't even try. And I fear I know just who to blame. It's my poor friend me, a reminder of a tragic history. It's my poor...
No, that's the album that Fat Mike made, Archivist. It's a joke.
Friend me, and I'm running out of steam. My poor friend me.
It's chilling, haunting. But much of Bad Religion's catalog, I think, could all be converted acoustically, and it doesn't actually lose very much. Like maybe All Good Soldiers couldn't have done it, and there's some songs in there, but most of their set works as an acoustic set. Let's check out Looking In from '98.
Suddenly, it came to me, a potent dosage of reality. I saw myself in the broad daylight, and it made me think about life. Now I am not the kind of guy who nods his head with...
This is going to be real obscure to some of you guys, but if you know the song Animal Boy by the Ramones, I get that vibe from Looking In. It has a similar vibe. I don't know what it is.
Close eye, I've got that label, my sense of see, and this boy's true fatality. All along I thought that this was only human.
See, people who don't like this album say there's not enough bangers. Like half of the album is these kind of songs, and then you get like Man on a Mission and Kerosene and All Good Soldiers kind of mixed in there. Stealth maybe.
But I know now that I'm in the minority. I'm looking at.
Also kind of has a Process of Belief vibe to it. Like it sounds like a song that would have been on Process of Belief.
Now I think in relation to my fellow man and what he tries to do, we fail to see there's no compromise. Our evolution is our demise. I don't... One day you may find you're also one of me. Hey, complex microcosm of the human race. Observing those around us, desiring to belong. Behind the guise of salvation, we suffer all along the way. Yeah, we're looking in.
How many times do they reference their own songs in their songs too? They do that constantly. What's up, Green Butterfish?
Looking in, we're looking in. Looking in, we're looking in. We're looking in.
Bad Religion has so many of these too. Look, what a great still for Dr. Graffin. Bad Religion has so many of these great, late, deep cuts that really make these albums just pop onto another level. Bad Religion is very consistent albums. I don't think like their early songs on the album are the ones that, those are the hits, those are the ones you need to go to, and the rest of it's filler. They have pretty even albums. Let's go acoustic for Don't Pray on Me. And this is kind of a funny. I wish there was a better acoustic version than this because I love the song, but I just couldn't find a playable one. This is by Emily Davis.
easily seen on my electron beam. Told a story about human rights. So all the king's horses and all the king's men had a right.
This would be much better if she didn't do the little harmonizing thing, because otherwise it sounds like great.
For 2 days and nights. Well, the city exploded, but the gates wouldn't open, so the company asked him to quit. Now everybody's equal, just don't measure it. Well, Hanson did it to Hester, and Mark David did it to John, and maybe Jack did it to Marilyn, but he did it to South Vietnam.
So subtle right there, right? What was Jack up to? Listen to the Misfits. They'll tell you about that. Oh, really? I didn't know about that. She has a cool channel. I just kind of discovered her today checking this out. And she has a lot of songs that are really in our vein, archivist.
Money, love, and country. Now every...
Yeah, you know what, 87, this is another one of those late album songs. It reminds me of like You Don't Belong, or those ones that are just, that have that kind of vibe to them on a deep in a Bad Religion album.
Everybody's doing it. Don't do that to me. A bitter debate and a feminine fate lie in tandem like two precious babes. And the former gets warmer, it's the latter that matters. Stepped on the nation's airwaves, and custodians of public opinion stayed back after vainly discussing her rights. Lay hands off her body. It's not your fucking life.
Boy, isn't that relevant today?
Don't know what stopped Jesus Christ from turning every hungry stone into bread. And I don't remember hearing how Moses reacted when the innocent firstborn sons lay dead. Well,
it's such a good way that Bad Religion does of really painting, like we know this in politics now, but of really equating conservatism and the religious right. I know Reagan was like the king of that, and obviously that's where they're sort of socialized politically, but they really did a good job of it. I mean, that's what American Jesus is, right? And this is just kind of an extension of it right there.
Well, I guess God is a lot more demonstrative back when he flamboyantly parted the seas. Now everybody's praying, don't pray on me. Now everybody's praying, don't pray on me.
Yeah, see, because I'm all about, like, was it Jen Florentino? I love, she does all those No Use for a Name covers that I love. But Emily Davis, hit that subscribe button. I want to check out her channel. Should do a deep dive on her one of these days. Couple more to go, guys. What do we have here? Modern day catastrophists. That's funny that you had that bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a low point, but it's actually a different spot. And then you have Modern Day Catastrophists and Skyscraper to sort of cleanse your palate if you're not into that. I wish this was mixed a little bit louder. Just amazing. Let's go from modern day Catastrophist though to some modern day Bad Religion doing Skyscraper. Isn't it funny though? Let me go out on a little rant here. Footage of a band from the 80s and 90s is going to be in much better condition on YouTube than footage from like last week because like it wasn't shot on a crappy camera phone. So if it was shot in the 80s or 90s, it would probably shot somewhere good, or there's at least been a soundboard recovery or something. To further my point, again, think of how late Skyscraper comes in the album and how prominent of a song it is for them. Oh, what archivist? You don't give that respect to Stealth? Stealth is a real song, archivist. You know it. Forgot the lyrics. And there will be some... No, it just kind of sounds like that. Oh, that part's so good. God damn. I don't know why I made that sound. That was disturbing. What a perfect song. What a perfect song. No, I didn't see that, archivist. I mean, good for him if he can get those pipes repaired. Even I'm sure it's causing him trouble, not just singing, just in real life. And he can make you happy there, archivist. I do have a bit of Stealth here. I found someone that did a bass cover of Stealth. So it's mostly the studio version.
Hi, welcome to Stealth.
Oh no! So our buddy Josh Yaks is gonna be out of luck. He won't be able to see Lagwagon there. That's a bummer. That was Stealth. That's the end of Recipe for Hate. Recipe for Hate's a fucking amazing album. It really, really is. I said earlier it's kind of like a forgotten milestone, and I really do mean that because it didn't get enough chance to breathe as an album, even though like the songs were really big. As an album, I don't think it got enough chance to breathe. And none of those early Bad Religion albums really do. Sometimes in my brain, I like, wait, what was on No Control and what was on Against the Grain? Sometimes I'll get that confused in my head. And that's just sort of the nature of the beast with how prolific Bad Religion was in that era. But oh, that's heartbreaking. 87. On that note, though, you could understand what they were going for with Recipe for Hate, not just from a stylistic standpoint, but where they were in music. Like, say if they don't get signed, but you're just like, you're the Pearl Jam, Nirvana dude, and you're liking alternative music, you're liking modern music, you're Gen X, you're just trying to figure things out, and you pick up Recipe for Hate, and you know about punk rock a little bit, and you know about punk rock has a huge influence over your alternative rock, but maybe you're not that into it. If you picked up Recipe for Hate, you would like punk rock but not feel turned off by it. It would have enough stuff for you that sounds like the other stuff that you're consuming, the stuff you're getting on 120 minutes, with songs like Skyscraper, with songs like Recipe for Hate, with songs like American Jesus. If anything, Recipe for Hate just deserved to breathe a little bit more. Guys, I got to tell you, I was kind of disappointed in my research level for this week. I wasn't able to commit to it what I normally did. So I just did a very like Wikipedia, I would say, blow through of Recipe for Hate. I am not super proud of it. I actually knew America is a very underrated album. 1, 2, 3, 5. I dismissed it many years ago. I've gone back and checked it out a few times. And they have a lot of Brett back. I think they've actually said it was like one of their funnest albums to make in the Atlantic era. And that's what this album did. That's a good segue because this album really connected them to the Atlantic era. I think they get signed either way. I don't think this album put them on there. I think the environment was such that they got signed, but they really had something to make that decision a lot easier for the people that were going to be throwing cash around at them. Now, they didn't care about that much once they got to the major label. Bad Religion has kind of a neutral relationship with their major label experience. They were not like destroyed career-wise, but they didn't grow on it either. It's a very neutral experience. It's not like how the Ataris kind of got blown away, or like AFI became permanent rock stars, or even Anti-Flag that got a lot of money and utilized that to build their studio. They don't really have any of that. They just have a very neutral experience where they were without one of their key members. But we'll talk about that at a different time. I'm going to have to sign off here in about a minute or two, guys. I don't know what the next stream is going to be because last week, and that was like Graffin's dream, right? Last week's not having a stream kind of threw off the calendar. So the stream this week was supposed to be the Dropkick Murphy stream for Blackout. I have to check the schedule to see exactly where that's going to go. But that one is coming along with the Warped Tour 2003 retrospective, along with the big Life Won't Wait episode. That's the Life Won't Wait episode is the one I'm trying to really put all that research back into. I like doing the deep dives on Rancid. I loved the Op It Ivy one we did a couple weeks ago. Last week was a little bit different. We just had some fun with Lagwagon Day. Didn't they go to Hawaii to record that, Archivist? I could be wrong. Yeah, I think they recorded that in Hawaii. I don't know. I might be confused. The same way I get some of the early Epitaph records confused, I get some of the Atlantic records a little bit jumbled up. That's why I made that chart earlier. I'm not too familiar with the Daredevils, to be honest with you. All right, guys, but I got to sign off. I got to go pick up my daughter. Hope you had some fun reliving Recipe for Hate. We will definitely be on here this time next week, but it's a high likelihood that there is going to be another stream happening before next week. So just keep your eyes peeled on the